Hello there. This week we move on to chapter 7. 7 is kind of a funny number. Not funny as in ha-ha, but funny as in interesting. Many people see the number 7 as lucky. In gambling, 3 sevens on a slot machine brings you a big payout. And when you add up the numbers on the opposite sides of a die, they add up to 7. There are 7 days in a week, 7 colors in a rainbow, and even Snow White had 7 dwarfs. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with our topic this week, but I just thought I would point it out to you. Okay, let's talk more about teaching English to students of various proficiency levels. By the end of this video, I hope you'll have a better understanding of these 2 points. Make sure you keep these in mind as we go through the video. And here are our main topics today. I'd say that most of you in my class will be teaching students at the beginner and intermediate levels in the future. So those 2 sections especially will be important for you. That doesn't mean you can skip through the other sections though, of course. Are you ready? Let's begin. We start off with a discussion about the descriptions of proficiency levels. We can't just say, this student is a beginner and that student is advanced. We need to have some support to back our claims. Luckily for us, back in the 1960s, some people met up and put their heads together to write some descriptions of different linguistic levels. Now, we have descriptions such as the ILR scale, which you can see on page 132 of our book. The IELTS scale, which is summarized on page 133, the ACTFL proficiency guidelines, which you'll find on page 134, and probably the most popular one referred to these days, the Common European Framework of Reference, or CEFR, part of which you can find on pages 137 and 138. Here in Japan, you can also find CEFR J, which is based on the European version, but modified for the Japanese learning environment, and includes the can-do list, which concretely describes what students should be able to do at different levels of proficiency. Of the descriptions mentioned above, I really suggest you become quite familiar with CEFR and the can-do list. It might be worth checking out this book too. Before we get into talking about the 3 levels, let's have a quick discussion about our own thoughts on proficiency levels. When you see or hear someone's English, or whatever the target language is, what do you notice that tells you their proficiency level? I mean, how do you decide whether someone is at a beginner level, intermediate level, or advanced level? I don't want you to refer to the standards I talked about in the previous slide, but your own opinion. Have a think about it and get ready to share your ideas in class. Even though we are going to look at just 3 levels in this video, each level has descriptions from 10 different perspectives. I don't have time to go into each one in detail, so let's keep it really brief. First, when thinking about the cognitive learning process of beginners, even though they have little schemata or background knowledge to call upon, we can still encourage students to use language for practical, meaningful purposes. As the teacher, you may need to speak a little more than you would in the higher levels, because you need to provide models of the language. You can also use pair work and group work effectively. When you are speaking with your beginner students, you need to slow down, but don't make it unnatural. A clear voice with a natural rhythm will work fine. Keep your language real. As I have said earlier, authentic language is important. You need to use language that reflects what is used in real life at this level too. You need to focus both on fluency and accuracy, of course, but fluency should be based on short sentences and accuracy focused on the grammar point of the lesson, not what is studied on other days. Due to their lack of linguistic knowledge, getting students to be too creative can be difficult. Keep it simple so students feel in control of their language use. Again, due to students' lack of experience with the language, the amount of time you spend on one activity will be short. Make sure you have a strong bank of activities to call upon in your classes with beginners. Even if your students are beginners, there are plenty of things they can do with the language. Make sure their listening and speaking goals reflect what they can do even with their limits. For reading and writing, we need to find easier material that can be scanned and information found easily. Examples of such materials include recipes and advertisements. Finally, we need to think about teaching grammar, which is what form-focused instruction means. At this level, it might be better for you to use the student's L1 to point out grammatical functions. We'll talk more about this in Chapter 19. Okay, that was the beginner level. Just 2 more to go. Before that, however, let's have another discussion. The book mentioned about reading material for beginners. I would like you to find some examples of authentic material you might be able to use to help beginner learners with their reading skills. Let's see if we can bring in 5 different examples. Now let's move on to the intermediate level, where students are gaining confidence but still might be a little nervous to take too many risks with language. At the cognitive level, we can start to encourage more automaticity among our students, where they are using English without thinking about it too much. Rather than you, the teacher, the students should be the ones initiating conversations and asking questions. Aim for more learner-centered lessons. You can maintain your speech at a natural speed now, but you still need to be aware of how clearly you are speaking. Students should be speaking more than the teachers. We need to be aiming for higher authenticity, but also need to make sure students are aware that they don't need to sound like a native speaker, even though some of them will feel that they have to. When it comes to fluency and accuracy, a balance between the two is vital. We don't want to correct every error, but students shouldn't be speaking like they are just grabbing words at random out of the dictionary. Because students have more control over the language, we can encourage more creativity. When students are being creative, as their teacher, you should notice the difficulties they have and try to strengthen those weaknesses. Students should now be able to spend more time on each activity, and we should also be able to increase the complexity of those activities. Students' listening proficiency may be higher than their speaking, which might cause some frustration. They can understand, but can't say what they want to say. Keep the conversation short and interesting and include a lot of questions. Reading and writing is similar. Complexity needs to increase and skimming and scanning skills developed to a higher level. Finally, the instruction of grammar will increase in difficulty, and teachers can also aim to do some of the explanations in the target language. This will be tough for students at first, but over time will be beneficial for their learning. Okay, time for another discussion. We saw that at the intermediate level, teachers should be using more of the target language. I always believe that it isn't how much of the student's L1 you use and how much of the target language you use, rather the reasons why you use the L1 or TL at different times in the lesson. I wouldn't say, open your books in the L1 because it's a common instruction. Some humor, however, will only work in the L1. So what ideas do you have about when to use the student's L1 and when to use the target language in class? Try to be concrete and give examples to support your opinion. Well, we now move on to advanced students, but I'm not going to go through a detailed explanation like I have for the other 2 levels. At this stage, I don't think many of us will need to worry too much about teaching advanced students just yet. Here is an easy summary of the 10 points. Make sure you look through this slide and confirm what is written in your textbooks. So that's it. It all finished quite abruptly, didn't it? Put your thinking caps on and get some ideas ready for our discussions, and I'll see you in class.